Good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020, and here we will be reading tonight from The Strength of the Wolf by Douglas Valentine, a book published in 2005, which I wasn't aware of until the past 2 months or so, and I've devoured it, and it's wonderful. And it gives us a lot of insight that I didn't have before, courtesy of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Harry Anslinger, a very unattractive subject to me for many years, but wow, I've got an awful lot out of this so far. And so tonight we're going to have some fun with Aggravating Edgar. Edgar, of course, being J. Edgar Hoover, also referred to by some as J. Edna Hoover, or simply Edna. But the other character that shows up in this chapter is Bobby Kennedy himself. So I look forward to sharing this chapter with you. It's a lot of fun and maybe a bit spooky for a Halloween evening. Say hello to everyone. Corky, you're here a lot tonight, man. We're glad to hear you too. One love to all ospreys. Okay. No, that's not cult. This is the Blue Osprey cult. I don't know if that's funny or not. Corky, Mobster, and our wonderful Kathy Sue is here to keep everybody on track with her mighty wrench. Hello, Kathy Sue. So nice to have you here. Too hot. Well, I made myself some ginger honey tea tonight instead of having a cold drink because it's a little chilly. We turned the heat on here at Mystery Island for the first time tonight, and so got to have a little something warm. But it's a little too hot right now, so we will get to do some reading, and then I can enjoy my ginger honey tea. Okay, The Strength of the Wolf by Douglas Valentine, page 259, chapter 17, Aggravating Edgar, Bobby Kennedy, and the FBN. Here's a quote at the beginning from Shakespeare's Hamlet. What to ourselves in passion we propose, the passion ending, doth the purpose lose. For 32 years, Harry Anslinger suffered J. Edgar Hoover's insults and interference and did nothing in response. Anslinger submissively accepted the fact that Hoover was a more powerful bureaucrat with 10 times as many agents, a vastly bigger budget, a broader mandate, and secret files that he'd been compiling since his salad days as a special assistant on subversive matters to Attorney General Mitchell Palmer. Yes, that Palmer, the Palmer raid Palmer. It is said that Hoover brought along these files when he became the FBI's assistant director in 1921, that he continually expanded them after he became FBI director in 1924, and that he used them to compile dossiers full of dirty little secrets on America's top politicians during a reign of intimidation that lasted 46 years and spanned the incumbency of 8 presidents. Knowing he was outgunned, Anslinger refrained from directly challenging Hoover, but a rivalry simmered between them, and for years Hoover kept Anslinger on the defensive by making snide comments about the corrupting influences of undercover narcotics work. Plus which, the publicity-conscious FBI director grabbed all the glory by having his agents chase celebrity public enemies like John Dillinger at the expense of mounting arduous investigations of organized crime. Anslinger, however, had Andrew Mellon and several other establishment heavyweights in his corner, and he could not be dismissed. He wasn't intimidated by Hoover's bluster and prominence, and he continued about his business. In public he behaved properly, as if he respected the despicable little man. Behind the scenes, the personal animosity between the two bureaucratic warlords began in 1932, during the Charles Lindbergh kidnapping case. Anslinger's mentor and friend, Elmer Ivy, chief of the IRS intelligence unit, played a decisive role in the investigation by having marked bills passed to Richard Hauptmann, the alleged kidnapper. That measure, which was standard operating procedure for FBN agents, led to Hauptmann's capture and conviction. Lindbergh was grateful, but Hoover was incensed. Fearing that Irie would solve the case, Hoover initially tried to have him removed from it, but Lindbergh objected and prevailed, so Hoover put Irie under FBI surveillance in a brazen attempt to steal his investigative leads. Despite Hoover's juvenile attempts to preempt him, Irie single-handedly solved the case, and Lindbergh publicly credited him for doing so. But the indignity of having been upstaged prompted Hoover to open one of his secret files on Irie, and for years afterward, Irie routinely checked his telephone for FBI taps. The episode taught Anslinger a valuable lesson about the petty FBI director's unforgiving and abusive nature, and the advantages of staying out of his line of fire. Hoover's fad for chasing down, quote, most wanted criminals subsided with the Depression, and Anslinger's prestige grew during the Second World War, but Hoover's power grew even greater. While many of Anslinger's agents joined the armed services and his workforce diminished, President Roosevelt increased the number of FBI agents for 5-fold and gave Hoover carte blanche to bug and wiretap anyone in the name of national security. The FBI was also made responsible for intelligence operations in the Western Hemisphere, and Hoover spread 150 Special Intelligence Service agents throughout Latin America and Canada. The FBI director also entered into an exclusive liaison relationship with William Stevenson, chief of Great Britain's intelligence operations in the Western Hemisphere. And this is the William Stevenson we've often talked about as having set up office there in the same building there with the FBI, and basically running, I'm sorry, not the FBI, the OSS in New York, and basically starting the OSS and picking the agents and having a tremendous influence on the development of the OSS and subsequently, of course, the CIA itself. So this is a big problem for people like me who are very suspicious of the British influence and whether it's being used not to assist America in fighting crime, but to assist Great Britain in controlling America. Oh, excuse me. It was nice to have my mute button back. I'll tell you, it's once you get used to having a mute button, and then you try to take a sip of something, and you feel, oh no, I don't have my mute button. Well, it's a great thing to have. Hoover savored his exclusive relationship with Stevenson while it lasted, but then, in 1942, President Roosevelt put William Donovan in charge of the OSS. The British welcomed Donovan and his OSS forces, which started fighting behind enemy lines in Europe, and Wild Bill cheerfully crashed what J. Edgar thought was going to be a private party with Bill Stevenson. That hurt socially and professionally, but when Donovan's OSS agents started mounting counterintelligence operations in the U.S., in one instance breaking into the Spanish embassy, Hoover retaliated in every way possible. Having formed a fast personal relationship with Donovan and having sent several of his best men into the OSS, Anslinger again found himself allied with one of Hoover's most hated rivals. Still steaming after the war, Hoover opposed Donovan's efforts to form the CIA. He repeated a claim he had made about the OSS and said that the CIA was hiring communists. But the agency was created over Hoover's protests, and when President Truman decided that the new spy agency should absorb the FBI's operations in the Western Hemisphere, Hoover vindictively ordered his agents not to share their files or sources with the CIA, with whom Anslinger had also aligned. The new wave of anti-communist witch hunts instigated in 1950 by Senator Joe McCarthy restored Hoover's confidence and sense of purpose, and during the ensuing Cold War his powers peaked. FBI agents were exempted from civil service rules, and under the aegis of national security were allowed to conduct burglaries and all types of illegal surveillance. And I have to think of my dad there because I know that he did black bag jobs, quote unquote, for Hoover. That's just personal knowledge from family history. With eyes and ears in bedrooms all over Washington, Hoover packed his files full of sexy secrets that he traded to beholden politicians for power. Then in 1956, he unveiled his most awesome weapon ever, the notorious counterintelligence program COINTELPRO, which allowed FBI agents to commit any crime imaginable in order to suppress civil rights and leftist groups that threatened national security. COINTELPRO enabled him to shape the political climate in America, and his bulging secret files prompted Senator Estes Kefauver to declare that Hoover had, quote, more power than the president, unquote. That may have been true, but Anslinger wasn't afraid, and he eventually forced a showdown with Hoover over the mafia. As we know, Hoover denied its existence, and his disingenuous position on this issue had a cumulative negative effect on federal drug law enforcement. So, in his last year as commissioner of the Bureau of Narcotics, Anslinger unleashed his frustration and fury in a 1962 interview. He said that he had refused to give a copy of the Mafia book to Hoover because he, quote, just wouldn't risk it, unquote. Anslinger insinuated that Hoover had been corrupted by organized crime, and it was true. Hoover's friend, columnist Walter Winchell, socialized with Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello and served as an intermediary between the famous, influential gangsters and the starstruck FBI director. Hoover and Costello actually met on occasion, and investigative journalist Anthony Summers, citing several sources, reports that Lansky acquired from Donovan and the OSS photographs of Hoover engaged in a homosexual act, and that those pictures put him in the mob's pocket forever. Not only was Hoover a closet queen, he was a degenerate gambler, too. He liked to bet on the ponies, and in exchange for free passes and hot tips, he repaid his underworld patrons by insisting that racetrack gambling was not a federal crime. He pretended not to know that Lansky and Costello controlled the off-track bookie business, or that it was one of organized crime's biggest sources of revenue. Anslinger's standing with Hoover did not improve during the Kefauver hearings, which with the FBN's expert assistance, forced Costello into early retirement and Lansky into exile. But Hoover quickly found a new patron in Texas oil tycoon Clint Murchison. And starting in 1953, Hoover and his housemate, FBI Executive Clyde Tolson, became Murchison's annual guests at the Del Mar racetrack in California. The oil man's ties to organized crime were not as close as Costello's, but they were there. According to Summers, quote, 20% of the Murchison Oil Lease Company was owned by the Vito Genovese crime family. Handridge Oil, a Murchison-owned outfit, was the subject of a deal with Las Vegas gamblers involving massive security violations. There were also to be deals with Jimmy Hoffa, the crooked boss of the Teamsters Union, and Clint Jr. established financial ties with mafia boss Carlos Marcello. Hoover's defenders say he had bigger fish to fry and that he let Anslinger and the IRS chase the gangsters while his G-men pursued communists, civil rights leaders, and other menaces to national security. But the man had a secret agenda, and as the establishment's private police force, the FBI served its patrons by allowing organized crime to subvert the labor and civil rights movements from within. If the hoods moved drugs in their spare time, who cared? Like the mafia bosses said, as long as the poison ended up in ghettos and not in good neighborhoods. Anslinger and Hoover obviously agreed on the racial issue, but the FBI director's protection of organized crime undermined Anslinger's mission and his legacy. So he waited, and in a veiled attack on Hoover, he said in 1964, quote, sometimes our strongest foes can be found in the chambers of justice, the state houses, and even higher, unquote. Enter Bobby Kennedy. Anslinger waited until he was on the verge of retirement to attack his old foe, but he never would have had the opportunity if not for the November 1960 election of John F. Kennedy as president and his appointment of his brother Bobby as Attorney General. Ambitious, ruthless, and cunning, Bobby wasn't content to behave in the traditional role as the president's consigliere, and he used his authority as Attorney General to sidestep Hoover. Declaring war against organized crime, he increased the number of attorneys in the Justice Department's criminal division from 15 to 60 and directed them against the nation's leading racketeers. Bobby had a mean streak, too. In order to make his presence felt, he openly inquired how a behemoth like organized crime could escape the attention of the FBI's director. He further bruised Hoover's gigantic ego by praising the FBN for putting more mafia bosses behind bars than the FBI, and, according to George Gaffney, by dubbing it, quote, the Marine Corps of federal law enforcement, unquote. Figuratively speaking, this insolent behavior was a death sentence for both Bobby Kennedy and the FBN. Hoover was so angry that he sent a letter to Anslinger calling the Genovese case a frame-up and a travesty of justice. Heedless of having made an enemy of J. Edna, as he privately referred to the lavender-scented FBI director, Bobby formed a special group in the Justice Department to pursue Jimmy Hoffa and Hoffa's closest mafia associates, Santo Trafficante, Sam Giancana, and Carlos Marcello, all of whom shared Hoover's hatred of the overly aggressive Attorney General. But Bobby was looking for a fight, and his first reckless act as Attorney General was to deport Marcello to Guatemala in April 1961. As a pretext, Bobby claimed that Marcello was an undesirable alien, based on the fact that the FBN had busted him in 1938 for selling 23 pounds of marijuana. With this fateful action, Kennedy pushed his criminal and government enemies into an alliance, And 6 weeks after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, Marcello slipped back into America, and with equally furious anti-Kennedy factions in the FBI, CIA, Mafia, and Cuban exile community, began plotting revenge. $1 Million Men. While serving as chief counsel on Senator John McClellan's Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management, Bobby Kennedy learned how drug smuggling factored into the Mafia's relationship with the Teamsters. He was present in July 1959 when FBN agent Ike Worms explained to the committee how Teamsters official Abe Gordon laundered drug profits through a union welfare fund. Bobby learned that Carlo Gambino was involved with the Teamsters through his labor consulting firm in Manhattan, and that Jimmy Hoffa had protected Detroit's major drug traffickers John Preziola and Raffaele Quazzarano by assigning them to Teamsters Local 985. He knew that Trafficante and Marcello were associated with Hoffa, that Marcello influenced the Teamsters and longshoremen's unions in Louisiana, and that Trafficante had an office at a Teamsters Local in Miami, which had been established by Mafia drug traffickers James Plumieri and Frank DioGuardia. Kennedy knew that Marcello's representative in Dallas, Joe Civello, had attended the Appalachian Conference on Marcello's behalf, and he suspected that Marcello, through Trafficante in Florida and Sam Carola and Frank Coppola in Sicily, played a dominant role in international drug trafficking. As Bobby was certainly aware, the FBN office in New Orleans believed that Marcello received narcotics from Trafficante in Florida on Teamsters trucks, and that his Pelican Tomato Company, which supplied naval bases in Louisiana, smuggled drugs from Mexico, quote, without interference from customs, unquote. Kennedy wanted to nail Trafficante and Marcello, but the FBN had only 4 agents in Miami and its New Orleans offices, and the FBI, though it had the manpower, chose not to place wiretaps on them. These two were the only mafiosi to receive such privileged treatment from J. Edgar Hoover. The FBI agent in charge in New Orleans, Regis Kennedy, even made the outrageous claim that Marcello was not involved in crime. So Bobby took matters in hand. INS officials arrested Marcello on a street in New Orleans, placed him in handcuffs, drove him to an airport, put him on a plane, and whisked him off to Guatemala, which he had identified on a falsified birth certificate as the land of his birth, without so much as a toothbrush. Marcello, however, had friends in high places in Central America, and, in addition to receiving a free pass from the FBI, he probably enjoyed CIA protection. They certainly shared the same unsavory business partners. Marcello ran a counterfeiting scam in Nicaragua that required kickbacks to Anastasio Somoza, the brutal dictator who, on behalf of the CIA, harbored anti-Castro terrorists on one of his private estates. As we know for a fact, the CIA sometimes employed gangsters for its nefarious purposes, and the agency probably arranged for Marcello's flight to Miami aboard a Dominican Air Force jet, quote, without either customs or immigration officials noting his arrival. Considering that his re-entry occurred prior to Trafficante's exposure as a double agent, It's also likely that, in return for the favor, Marcello joined William Harvey's ZR/Rifle project as a recruiter of assassins. By 1960, the CIA was protecting Joe Bonanno for the same murderous reason. Having moved to sunny Tucson, Arizona, and started a legitimate real estate company, he also formed a profitable regional alliance with his fellow racketeers, Santo Trafficante and Carlos Marcello. Like his newfound friends, he bought protection from the CIA, too. According to investigative reporter Seymour Hersh, during the winter of 1960 to 61, Bonanno was, quote, always calling William Harvey's boss. Where's my drum roll? Who is William Harvey's boss? Okay, students? All right, put up your hand. Who first can guess the name of the person that mafioso Joe Bonanno called? He was always calling William Harvey's boss, and William Harvey's boss was who? Okay, I guess there's too much of a delay on the show here for me to get the answer in real time. I'm still waiting to see if somebody comes up with it on the chat room. Okay, who was William Harvey's boss? Pete Ross, come on, you know. Well, let's just put it this way. He was one of McDuff's nemesis. It wasn't Alan Dulles. It was the other guy. Joe Bonanno was always calling Angleton. Angleton is a great guess, but no. No, not Colin Powell, not Hoover, not Mike the Hammer. No, not Mike Hammer. Nope. He was always calling Richard M. Bissell Jr. That's right, Richard Bissell. So if anybody thinks that Richard Bissell wasn't involved with the mafia, just read 265 of Strength of the Wolf and you'll see. Bonanno even wrote a letter offering to do what Bissell, quote, wanted him to do, unquote. In other words, having people killed. Bissell accepted the offer, and Bonanno's capo regime in New Jersey, Joseph Ciccarelli, provided the services. With the assistance of CIA asset Robert Mayhew, Ciccarelli sold guns to Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, and Ciccarelli's goon squad reportedly murdered one of Trujillo's political opponents in New York. Ciccarelli's henchmen may have even switched alliances and served as the intermediaries in the 30th of May 1961 assassination of Trujillo, which relied on guns that were provided to the victim's personal opponents by the CIA as part of Harvey's ZR/Rifle program. Ciccarelli enjoyed political protection locally through his congressman, Cornelius E. Gallagher, but it was his dirty work for the CIA that made him a $1 million man, as mobsters with the CIA or FBI protection are called, and granted him temporary immunity from prosecution on federal narcotics charges. This was an unfortunate development for the FBN insofar as Ciccarelli had replaced the recently incarcerated Carmine Galante as the Bonanno family's narcotics manager. Ciccarelli was a suspect in the Cotroni and Rinaldo cases, and through a wiretap on a gun store owner in New Jersey, the FBN knew that he had attempted to purchase 1,000 rifles for anti-Castro exiles in the CIA's employ. But Ciccarelli, like Marcello and Trafficante, was light years beyond the FBN's reach. Oh, hello, Professor. Yeah, Yeah, Bissell and Hoover. And it's one of those things that I just have to wonder if they didn't pick those names for the vacuum cleaner companies in order to kind of cover up the the cleanup squad, if you'll call it that. Hi, Guillermo. It's nice to have you joining us once again tonight. And yeah, Bissell's brother was Skull and Bones, and I don't remember if his father was, but you know, he didn't himself join Skull and Bones, but that doesn't mean he didn't participate in their creepy projects. He's quoted as calling himself a man-eating shark, and that he was. Bobby Kennedy's mortal foes. Bobby Kennedy, like Harry Anslinger, could not be bought. He was a rich man, bent on destroying organized crime's corrupting influence on American society. And yet, just a few months after he had taunted Sam Giancana during televised hearings before the McClellan Committee, parentheses, he had said that Giancana giggled like a girl, unquote. His father, on the 29th of February 1960, met with Giancana at a restaurant in New York. Joseph Kennedy was there, with Giancana, Johnny Roselli, and Mario Brode, James Angleton's liaison to the Mafia, and there's Angleton popping up, to negotiate the terms by which the Mafia's constituents in Illinois would vote for JFK in the upcoming presidential election. The Hoods were trying to decide whether to support JFK or Texas Senator Lyndon B. Johnson, who was backed by Carlos Marcello, through Joe Civello and his bid for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. Family patriarch Joe Kennedy argued that Giancana's organization would fare better under a Kennedy administration, which had many financial holdings in Chicago, and he asked the Hoods to contribute $500,000 to JFK's campaign. For practical business reasons, the money was forthcoming, despite Giancana's hatred of Bobby Kennedy. Then the inexplicable happened. Sometime in October 1960, while plotting with the CIA to murder Castro, Giancana came to suspect that comedian Dan Rowan was putting the moves on his girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire. Rather than use his considerable muscle to resolve the matter privately, Giancana asked CIA asset Robert Mayhew for help, and Mayhew, breaching CIA security, sent an employee to spy on Rowan in Las Vegas. Yeah, it is that guy. That's Dan Rowan. Remember Rowan and Martin? In another departure from standard security practices, Mayhew's private detective left his listening post in the room next to Rowan's, ostensibly to watch a Vegas floor show, and while he was gone, a chambermaid found his tape recorder running. She called the hotel manager, who called the police, who called the FBI, who called the CIA, and eventually the case was buried 18 months later, on April 7, 1962, when CIA General Counsel Lawrence Houston explained to Herbert J. Miller, the Assistant Attorney General, that the agency had employed Giancana in its assassination plots, and that prosecuting him would harm national security. I don't think Bissell and Oswald are very closely connected, Guillermo. I haven't seen that. What's important about this botched bugging incident, assuming that it wasn't intentional and that Bobby Kennedy had no knowledge of his father's meeting with the mob, is that Bobby didn't know that Giancana was a million-dollar man until April 1962, when Hoover finally told him about Giancana's role in the CIA's assassination plots. Hoover had known since October 1960 about the role the Chicago Hood played in the CIA's plans to kill Fidel Castro, and his long delay in notifying Kennedy was a clear indication of his hostile intentions, as well as his partisan political support for Richard Nixon. Giancana had exposed his CIA connection simply as an insurance policy, but Mayhew, like Hoover, had assisted him on behalf of Nixon. The future president had been party to the Castro assassination plots from their inception during the Eisenhower administration, and Mayhew, at the time of the Vegas bugging blunder, was handling public relations for billionaire Howard Hughes, one of Nixon's biggest financial backers. Just to remind everyone that Robert Mayhew is what we call a CIA cutout, is what you'll read about him. He is the guy that supposedly got the hit team together for the assassination of Castro, and we are kind of being led to believe that that was just flipped over to Kennedy. But the idea that it wasn't actually the Lyndon Johnson-based crowd that were doing the act, but in fact it was these really former Nazi-connected folks that come out of the aerospace industry that were actually putting together the plot, and that involves the OAS, the assassins, or the would-be assassins of de Gaulle as well as Kennedy. Nixon, of course, is a man who's been an insider working behind the scenes for Prescott Bush. And as a presidential candidate, he now has become a favorite of these CIA-connected mafiosi. Professor Hamamoto, I got a drum beat for you. There you go. Nice one. That's right. It was Johnson that got the Smothers Brothers booted off TV. I remember that very well, Nan, now that you remind me of it. Yeah, they were great. They were really a lot of fun to see them on, I think they were on Sullivan. And then they had their own show. The CIA and FBI had one thing in common. Neither was anxious to help Bobby Kennedy. And it wasn't until the 7th of May, 1962, that the CIA finally told Bobby about its Cuban escapades. And even then, CIA Security Chief Sheffield Edwards and General Counsel Lawrence Houston lied. They said that their assassination attempts had ended with Traficante's exposure as a double agent, and they promised to warn Bobby if they ever dealt with gangsters again. The smirking CIA officers then slinked away, knowing full well that Mayhew had introduced Johnny Roselli to CIA assassination chief Bill Harvey on the 8th of April 1962 without the Attorney General's knowledge, and that Harvey had delivered poison pills and weapons to Manuel Varona, the anti-Castro politician Traficante had brought in to assist in the conspiracy. Quote, the Attorney General was not told that the gambling syndicate operation had already been reactivated, nor, as far as we know, was he ever told, unquote, the CIA casually admitted in an Inspector General's report dated 1967. In yet another telling sin of omission, James Angleton, who deeply resented Bobby's interference in CIA counterintelligence operations, would neglect to tell Bobby about Mario Broad, his liaison to Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli until 1963. Yet another million-dollar man, Roselli was assisting Hoover as well as the CIA in the conspiracy to sabotage Bobby Kennedy. Through an FBI wiretap on Roselli, Hoover was aware of some 70 phone calls between Jack Kennedy and Pretty Judith Campbell, a mob courier in the mold of Virginia Hill, but without Hill's stature. Roselli had introduced Kennedy and Campbell at a swinging Frank Sinatra campaign party in Vegas, while Campbell was romantically involved with Sam Giancana, who in parentheses experienced no irrational fits of jealousy this time, suffering from terminal satyriasis. Doug Valentine, if you just created a word, satyriasis, the state of being a satyr. Kennedy continued to see Campbell until the 22nd of March 1962, when Hoover confronted him with his indiscretion. At this meeting, he also let the president know that he was aware of the deal that Mario Broad, on behalf of James Angleton, had brokered between Giancana and Joe Kennedy. Hoover tried to blackmail him, but Jack Kennedy wasn't intimidated, and after the revelation that top CIA officers had encouraged ultra generals in Algeria to mutiny against French President Charles de Gaulle, he stunned the establishment by firing the popular and much admired Allen Dulles, at which point the most powerful people in the CIA and the military started skirting the White House, leaving Jack and Bobby to defend themselves. Bobby Kennedy's assassination plots. While CIA assassinations were flourishing under Bill Harvey's ZR/Rifle program, Bobby Kennedy launched 3 of his own mafia-related plots to kill Fidel Castro. The first, incredibly, involved drug smuggler Norman Rothman. As Rothman reported to his FBI masters on the 26th of June 1961, Bobby's aides had invited him to the White House a few days earlier and had offered him leniency in a gun-running case in which he was caught smuggling arms to Castro with former Cuban President Carlos Prios Socarras if he would arrange to kill Castro. Rothman said he refused, and maybe he did. But the point is that his information certainly made a beeline to Hoover, supplying the devious FBI director with yet another dirty little secret to use against his nemesis. Putting Hoover's petty intrigues to one side, we should ask when, if ever, the FBI learned that the Attorney General was offering a major drug smuggler immunity to commit a political assassination, and how much the Bureau might have known. If anyone was in a position to know, it was Charlie Siragusa. Bobby's approach to Rothman occurred 5 days after Siragusa had denounced Santo Trafficante as a double agent. That vital piece of information undoubtedly reached Bobby immediately in view of his deep personal involvement in Cuban affairs. Siragusa may have delivered the message himself. At the time, July 1961, he was working closely with Bobby in an effort to ransom David Christ, a CIA officer who'd been captured in Cuba while trying to bug the Chinese news agency. He was also managing the MK Ultra pad in New York, and he'd been asked to help the CIA recruit gangsters for its political assassination plots. Charlie was involved in almost every important counterintelligence activity, so it's very likely that Kennedy or one of his aides consulted him about Rothman. The nature of Siragusa's relationship with Bobby Kennedy raises several questions about the thrust of federal drug enforcement. Specifically, it is conceivable that Siragusa did not tell Bobby about Rothman's long-standing association with Meyer Lansky, financier of international drug smuggling, or that Rothman co-owned the El Morocco Club in Havana with Corsican drug lord Paul Mondoloni, or that Mondoloni had been selling 50 to 150 kilograms of heroin every few months to Rothman and Trafficante since 1955, or that Rothman had invested with Genovese family member Charles Turin in Havana's Capri Casino, and that Giuseppe Di Giorgio, a card dealer at the Capri, was one of Trafficante's two major narcotics couriers, and an associate of Sal Maneri from the Rinaldo Palmieri case. How could Siragusa not make these connections? And how could he not make these connections known to the Attorney General, especially when Bobby had, at the time, aimed his first drug strike force at the defendants in the Rinaldo Palmieri case? In the year since Rinaldo and Palmieri were busted, Siragusa had been closely tracking Lansky, Trafficante, Mondoloni, and Rothman, four men at the top of the international drug trafficking conspiracy. He knew that Mondoloni had been in Havana in January 1960 and had met in Acapulco in April 1960 with drug smugglers Lucien Rivard, Marius Cao, and Rosario Mancino. He was aware that Mancino was the Sicilian supplier of ill-fated Albert Aguchi in Canada. Did he tell Bobby about this aspect of the Rinaldo Palmieri case? Did he seize the opportunity to pump Rothman for information about these interrelationships? Or was Rothman the ultimate million-dollar man? Remember, he would avoid imprisonment with Pepe Cotroni and Pittsburgh mafioso Sal Manarino, whose brother Gabriel was Trafficante's partner in Havana's Sanssouci casino, for attempting to sell $8.5 million worth of stolen securities. The reason, as explained in Chapter 12, was that Rothman had used the money to ship guns to Cuba in what was obviously a CIA-sponsored criminal conspiracy. Rothman was never investigated for drug smuggling either. By the summer of 1961, Castro had closed the last of Cuba's casinos, and the international drug lords were making new political arrangements in Mexico, Canada, and elsewhere. Rothman was privy to their plans and could have explained their intentions. If Siragusa did not corner Rothman in this regard, so that Bobby Kennedy could proceed in his assassination plots, then he had abandoned his personal commitment to drug law enforcement and had condemned the FBN to failure. At the exact time, Lee Spear was conducting his integrity investigation in New York. On the other hand, if Siragusa did tell Bobby the facts, then it was the Attorney General who chose to abandon his war on crime, simply for a chance to kill Castro. This seems to be the case, insofar as Bobby launched a second assassination project in early 1962, using CIA officer Charles Ford, a veteran of the Far East Asia Division, to contact mafia bosses in America and Canada for the sole purpose of finding someone to kill the Cuban Prime Minister. Bobby's third mafia-related assassination plot, Operation Mongoose, was activated in March 1962. Managed by the National Security Council's special group under the direction of General Edward Lansdale, Mongoose included William Harvey's ZR rifle unit, now dubbed Task Force W. In league with Harvey, Lansdale conjured up 33 often bizarre ways of destabilizing the Castro regime, including the introduction of cheap marijuana into Cuba and falsely accusing Cuba of drug trafficking. There were plans to assassinate Castro too, and in one remarkably explicit memo to his staff, Lansdale suggested that, quote, gangster elements might prove the best recruitment potential for actions against police intelligence officials. Lansdale added that chemical warfare agents should be fully considered. quote unquote. One can only imagine which mafia hitmen Charles Ford recruited and the crimes they, Lansdale, and the CIA committed in Cuba with the blessings of Bobby Kennedy, all to the detriment of the FBN and the American public. The intelligence angle. While Bobby Kennedy was using mafia drug smugglers in murder plots against Castro and thus neutralizing the FBN, the CIA was relocating to Havana Station and anti-Castro terror activities in Miami. Known as JM/Wave, the station was managed by Theodore Shackley, a protege of Bill Harvey from Germany. It included Lansdale's Mongoose unit and some 400 CIA case officers. Already the preferred habitat of America's mobsters, Miami was packed with dozens of CIA front companies, thousands of CIA informers and assets, and several drug-smuggling terror teams financed by wacky privateers like William Pauley, mentioned in Chapter 5 as having engineered the Pauley-Cook advisory mission to Taiwan in 1950. To cover a fraction of the cost of this massive enterprise, former OSS spymaster Paul Hellawell established and directed a string of drug money laundering banks for the CIA. At the time, Hellawell was general counsel for the Thai consulate in Miami, an active leader in Florida's Republican Party, and a friend of Nixon's cohort, Bebe Rebozo. Now, anyone who was alive at the time will remember the name Bebe Rebozo. It's just, I mean, it still makes me think of Bozo the Clown for some, Bebe Bebe Rebozo. Anyway, he is this buddy of Richard Nixon, who obviously had some serious connections. Okay, so this is Paul Hellawell of the famous Hellawell Plan that we've talked about so many times with George Webb, the plan to import heroin into the United States to finance the CIA's operations, taking down country after country and dividing and conquering all of the original cultures in a way that has destroyed so much of humanity. Among his drug smuggling credentials, Hellawell had worked with Chiang Kai-shek's intelligence chief, General Tai Lee, and had set up the CIA's drug smuggling Air Force, CAT, later Air America, as well as the Bangkok trading company Sea Supply, which provided cover for CIA officers advising the drug smuggling Thai border police. Functioning in a similar capacity in Panama was the ubiquitous World Commerce Corporation, the, quote, commercially oriented espionage net, unquote, formed by ardent Republican William Donovan and British spymaster William Stevenson. In Honduras, Richard Greenlee, a member of Donovan's law firm and a former OSS officer in Bangkok, set up Vanguard Services in 1962 as a front for yet another batch of CIA-financed, drug-related anti-Castro operations. There were dozens of CIA proprietary companies operating worldwide in similar fashion, and Anslinger in 1964 alluded to the power of this interlocking cabal of gangsters and spies when he referred to higher authorities, meaning the CIA, or Hoover, or both, subverting a grand jury that had been convened in Miami to probe the financial affairs of dozens of top mobsters. The excuse was that delicate investigations conducted by another government agency were underway, but Anslinger added angrily that this was a dodge to call us off, and it succeeded. All of which brings us back to Meyer Lansky, the ultimate sleeping partner whose drug money laundering enterprises stretched from Beirut to Las Vegas to the Bahamas, where, following the loss of his concessions in Cuba, he reestablished his gambling business with, among others, Louis A. Chesler and Wallace Groves. A Canadian millionaire and former rum runner, Chesler made a fortune in Florida land deals, then moved to Freeport and formed the Grand Bahama Development Company with Groves. With the help of Hellowell, Donovan and other CIA offices assets, mountains of Thai, nationalist Chinese, and Vietnamese drug money were allegedly invested in Castle Bank and Florida real estate deals through Chesler's General Development Company. Groves had fronted for Lansky since 1951 when he sold valuable Key Biscayne property to Elena Santiero Aleman, mother of Santo Traficante's Cuban business partner Jose Aleman. Eventually, the CIA hired Groves, Tex McCrary, and Michael McClaney, manager of Lansky's Miami Beach Dinner Club, to suborn the top governing officials in the Bahamas. Meanwhile, Lansky's financial aide, John Pullman, incorporated the Bank of World Commerce in the Bahamas to handle the skim from several Las Vegas casinos. Pullman then merged his Atlas Bank in some shadowy way with Intrabank in Beirut, formed by Palestinian Youssef Baidas, and financed by several Arab nations under the direction of a Saudi Arabian arms trader. Intrabank owned the Casino du Liban in Beirut. This world-famous casino was managed by Lansky's drug-smuggling Corsican contact, Marcel Francisi. Like the banks cited above, Intrabank's Bahamian branch laundered mafia, gambling, and drug money with the full knowledge of the CIA. Despite the FBI's spotlight on Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky was the linchpin in the intelligence aspect of international drug smuggling that fascinated Hank Manfredi. Charlie Siragusa watched him closely, and he knew that Lansky sent Joseph F. Nesline and Charlie Turina around the world in 1962 to set up nightclubs and arrange drug deals. FBI agents followed Nesline, a hitman from Ohio who ran a sexual blackmail ring in Washington, to a meeting in Germany with Davyad Dargai, an Iranian with a background in drug smuggling. FBI agents also followed Turina, a mob killer in the Genovese family, to Bermuda. And yet, despite the surveillance, neither Lansky, Turina, nor Nesline was ever convicted on drug charges. Quote, Lansky was a chameleon who compartmentalized his operations, bought political protection, and established fronts. George Gaffney explains, not even the McClellan Committee and the Department of Justice under Bobby Kennedy could get him. Tom Tripodi is blunter. Siragusa was neutralized, he says, with regard to the CIA and FBI's million-dollar men, among them Meyer Lansky, and their seething hatred of the Kennedy administration. Here's one example of how this animosity was inspired. JFK wanted to expel Air America, the CIA's drug-smuggling proprietary airline, from Laos. Well, I have to stop and take a breath there. I know I'm over my hour, but I'm almost done with the chapter. But I never knew that. JFK wanted to expel Air America from Laos. Well, that's, of course, is the business that was going on with the CIA in Laos at the time of the TDY adventure, when my father apparently sent out this amazing team to try to catch the CIA dealing drugs in Laos. Wow. And in 1962, in another attempt to curb the CIA's drug smuggling activities, Bobby indicted Sea Supply manager Willis Byrd, the original OSS liaison officer to General Tai Lee, for having bribed a U.S. official in Laos. The president also fired Ultra General Edwin Walker for attempting to indoctrinate U.S. troops on behalf of the Christian Crusade. These were dangerous moves, but not as perilous as Kennedy's plans to desegregate the South and eliminate the oil depletion allowances that enriched Texas oil men, like Hoover's patron Clint Murchison, the emerging Bush dynasty, and right-wing zealot H.L. Hunt, and allowed them to seize control of oil reserves in the Middle and Far East. So Kennedy's enemies ensured that the Byrd prosecution was blocked, and that Air America kept its contract in Laos and continued to fly drugs. Meanwhile, General Walker, the far-right American Security Council, including General Lansdale and Air America Chairman Admiral Felix Stump, and the Texas Ultras started plotting their coup d'etat in Dallas. Such was the new frontier the FPN's wolf pack entered as the Kennedy brothers burst upon the scene. It was a wild country populated by an angry FBI director, CIA assassins, and drug smugglers, and, starting in March 1962, with the creation in the Pentagon of the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, members of the U.S. Army Special Forces assigned by the CIA to monitor the drug trade in areas under communist control. In view of these developments, the new frontier was as inhospitable a place for the FBN, which continued its descent into knavish spookery and internecine warfare. Well, there you have it on page 273, a mention of SACSA, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, which was my father's job as counterinsurgency planner for 10 years, 61 or 9 years, 62 until his death in 71. And that is the end of chapter 17, and thanks for sticking with me tonight. I appreciate your being with me. And I will be off tomorrow, as usual, on Sundays, and I wish you all a very, very happy Sunday yourselves. We are doing real well, I think, as far as supporting the re-election of President Trump. We're doing everything we can, and I support you, and you support George and everybody else that is working so hard to make sure that this country stays free. Harry Bacharach, when are you going to get in touch with me, man? Let's play some tunes. You have my email. It's koproductionsusa@gmail.com. So shoot me an email. Maybe we can get a show together. Okay. Professor Hamamoto, stay away